So the landing of Apollo 12 took place on November 19th, 1969, and everything went according to plan. The mission control teams took the measurements from the lunar module's radio signals as it came around from behind the moon, and from that they did compute the error necessary to make sure that Intrepid was right on target for the crater that the Surveyor 3 spacecraft was sitting in on the Ocean of Storms. And Pete Conrad and Al Bean made a very colorful and talkative pair as they descended to the moon. And I'm going to play now the video of the movie film that was shot out the window with the audio of the astronauts' transmissions to Houston, and you'll hear them talking to each other. Pete Conrad, of course, flying the lunar module, and Alan Bean providing the necessary data to help Conrad judge his altitude and speed. You'll also hear mentioned the LPD. You'll remember from the last week that that's the landing point designator. That's the grid on Pete Conrad's window that gives him an idea of where the computer is targeting them. And you'll hear right as soon as they pitch over for the final phase of the descent, which is called P64, that's at the very beginning of this clip, you'll hear how excited Pete Conrad is when he first looks through the LPD grid and sees that in fact the computer is targeting them exactly for the crater where Surveyor 3 is, so that being a landmark that Conrad had memorized before the flight. So let's listen to the last few moments of the Apollo 12 landing, which I've edited together to remove, to just include portions of the descent. So it's sort of condensed, but you'll get some of the highlights. So here goes.
P64, Pete. P64. That's it, there's LPD.
Roger, copy, P64.
1,000 update. Hey, there it is. There it is! Son of a gun, right down the middle of the road! Outstanding, 42 degrees, Pete. Hey, it's starting right in the center of the crater. Hey, look out there. I can't believe it. Amazing! Fantastic! 42 degrees, dude. It's 42 degrees. You're at 800 feet. 33 degrees. It's 33 degrees. 240 coming down at 5. Hey, you're really maneuvering around. Yeah. Come on down, G. Okay. 10%, 2%. You're looking okay. 96 feet coming down at 6. Slow down the descent rate. 80 feet coming down at 4. You're looking good. 70 feet. Looking real good. Coming down at 2. Looking good. Watch the left. 31, 32, 38 feet coming down at 2. He's got it made. Come on in there. 24 feet. Contact light.
Roger, copy, contact.
Close landing, Pete. Outstanding, man. After our man, beautiful. Beautiful.
So you can hear how excited they were to be down on the surface of the moon, and you could also hear how excited Pete Conrad was at the really superb job that Mission Control did in targeting them exactly where they wanted to go. You may have noticed that Conrad was maneuvering quite a bit in the last few hundred feet, and in fact you hear Bean say you're really maneuvering around. Conrad was trying to find a safe place to land amidst all those craters, and you'll also notice in the final seconds of that descent that there was quite a lot of blowing dust, and more in fact than Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin had, so bad that Conrad had to pretty much rely on instruments during the final portion of the descent. But they were down safely, and as far as they knew, they were on target. But, it wasn't until Pete Conrad could get outside, which he did several hours after landing. Here he is making his way down the ladder of Intrepid, as photographed by Bean, who was still in the cabin but pointing his camera out the open hatch. And there's Pete going down the ladder, and he got down on the surface and he made his little quote. That's one, may have been a small one for Neil, but it's a long one for me. And then he walked around to the side of the spacecraft, and there in the distance on the wall of the big crater was the Surveyor 3 spacecraft. And so Conrad knew that they in fact had landed exactly where they wanted to be. And when you think about it, Apollo 11 landed 5 miles off target, and just by the very next landing they were able to land exactly where they wanted to be. Well, on the first moonwalk, Alan Bean joined Conrad on the surface, and one of the most important things they did was they set up a package of scientific experiments called the Apollo Lunar Surface Experiments Package, or ALSEP. It was actually powered by a thermonuclear generator, which used radioactive decay from a cylinder of plutonium, and that provided electrical power for several scientific experiments, including a seismometer and devices to measure the magnetic field of the environment near the moon, charged particles, and a few other things. And Bean is shown here about to pick up the assembled package of experiments for its transport to a location several hundred feet away, where he and Conrad will actually unstow the experiments and deploy them on the lunar surface. That all went according to plan. Conrad and Bean had a little while to go around to collect some rock samples. Not too many on this first moonwalk, but enough to make it a productive time for the geologists as well. And then they got back into Intrepid, they got a night's sleep, and the next day they went off on their second moonwalk, which brought them to several different craters around the Apollo 12 site and culminated in their visit to Surveyor 3. You can see here Pete Conrad standing next to Surveyor 3. You can see the mechanical scoop still stretched into space where it had once scooped into the moon's soil. And in fact, they cut that off and brought it back to Earth for the engineers to study. And Conrad's right hand is on the surveyor's television camera, which sent back thousands of images from the moon in 1967. And of course, that had been on the moon for just about 2 years, and the engineers wanted to know how it had fared in that time. And so they also cut the TV camera off and brought it back home with them. And you can see in the background, on the far rim of this big old crater, is the lunar module Intrepid. You can also see a big umbrella-shaped communications antenna, and you might be able to make out just to the right of that is the American flag. And that is perfect. This picture is just perfect proof that NASA had in fact pulled off a successful pinpoint landing. Well, in the next segment we will get to the next mission, Apollo 13.